Chapter 5. Once they were back in the Highlands again, Paxton Lee did his best to put the entire incident behind him. From his point of view, the less said about it, the better. He was no hero, and he didn't want anyone in Lee or anywhere else trying to make him one. Mostly, he didn't want any word getting out about the Sword of Lee and its magic. Even though neither Jet nor his sister had been present to witness the events surrounding his use of the blade, he had warned them not to talk to anyone about anything that had happened. He could assume that neither girl knew anything that might give away the sword's secret, but there was no point in taking chances. As an added precaution, he started carrying the weapon with him, keeping it close at all times. Hanging it back over the fireplace was out of the question. The girls, of course, were already proclaiming him a hero, and were quick to insist that even if they couldn't talk about it to anyone but each other, their opinion of him was not about to change. He could live with this, even though he insisted he hadn't done that much. He never said a word to them about what he had discovered the sword could do, or what he had witnessed in his battle with Arcanon. He simply told them that it was a difficult struggle, and they were all lucky to escape. Neither girl argued with what he was telling them, both grateful just to be home again and away from Arcanon and Dark House. But he knew Chrysalin suspected he wasn't telling them everything. She was particularly suspicious about the sword, even after he tried to explain it away by telling her that the sword served as protection against any further attacks. The way she looked at him as he offered this explanation let him know she thought there was something more to it. But Paxton refused to talk about it, repeating at every opportunity that she should do as he had instructed and keep this whole business to herself, especially from their mother, who fortunately hadn't returned in time to discover any of what had happened. She might hear of the confrontation at the Two Roosters, but she was not to hear of the kidnapping or the events that took place in Wayford. For the time being, they all needed to be very careful of where they went and what they did. Given Arcanon's reputation, this might not be finished, even though Paxton couldn't believe the sorcerer would risk a return visit to Lee and the Highlands anytime soon. It would be a mistake to take that for granted. So they all needed to keep alert, and if they went anywhere, they were not to go alone. Chris particularly had to do better about watching out for herself. She had to stop putting herself at risk. His sister was quick to shrug off his warning, but he had seen the look in her eyes when she was in Arcanon's hands. She was lucky she hadn't been hurt or molested in any way, and she knew it. Staying close to home and out of trouble would appeal to her for a while at least, and Paxton hoped that would be long enough. Meanwhile, he asked about in the city, speaking of a rumor he had heard that there was a sorcerer in Wayford named Arcanon who owned a business called Dark House and not only commanded magic, but was using it in defiance of Federation law. He communicated with those he knew who served on the Highlands Council, the official governing body of the country, and again with a select group of men and women who had family and friends living in Wayford, but his inquiries always ended in cautions. If anyone knew of this man and this place, it might be a good idea to speak with someone in the Federation government about what might be happening and see if something couldn't be done about it. And he asked everyone to be sure to let him know if they found out anything useful. But no one had heard or knew anything about Arcanum and Dark House. After a day or two of asking, he quit. He could only do so much without engaging in a full-on confrontation with the sorcerer. Even so, he asked the airfield manager and his mechanics to keep watch for any vessel bearing an attacking raven as its emblem, or flying a pennant designating it as a ship registered out of Wayford. Life went back to the way it had been. He continued making shipping runs into other regions of the Four Lands, but he took Chris with him when he did, teaching her what he knew about airships and flying, doing what he could to distract her from what had happened and from thoughts of Arcanum's possible return. Jet had found another job with another tavern, working once again as a serving girl, but with better people around her. She had grown much closer to Chris since the Two Roosters incident, and they had started to talk about forming a business making jewelry and baskets. It gave Paxson considerable peace of mind to know that his sister was spending most of her time with someone who would have at least a reasonable chance of keeping her out of trouble. He couldn't have said why Chris was the way she was. They had grown up in the same household with the same mother, and they had both suffered to some extent from the death of their father, but nothing dramatic or life-changing had happened to his sister to turn her into such a wild creature. Nothing had happened to her that hadn't happened to him. Nothing that would explain why she was so reckless and unsettled. He watched her while they made their airship runs, working the lines of the trader, tying off the radian draws onto the parse tube connectors, and hoisting light sheaths and spars. Tall, rangy, already beginning to grow out of her mid-teen awkwardness, she had all the makings of a first-class airman. She learned quickly, she worked hard, and she listened. But in spite of her skills and her potential, she spent her free time down in the taverns anyway, usually with Jet, drinking with the men, throwing dice, being rowdy and wild. She didn't get in fights anymore, but she remained confrontational, fiercely independent, and there was nothing he could think to do to change that. Even though his mother asked him now and then if there wasn't something he could say to her, or a means of persuasion he could employ to help change her, he knew it was a waste of time. Chrysalyn Lee was who she was, and she was the only one who could ever change that.